All right, hello everyone. Welcome back. We're in the final stretch. So I have the pleasure of introducing our next panel called Community Involvement and Economic Development. Please join me in welcoming Katie Beck Sutler, Vice President of Workforce Development at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, David Meade, the Executive Director at Building Skills New York, Liliana Polo-McKenna, the CEO of Opportunities for a Better Tomorrow, and our board member, and Mark Thomas, Senior Vice President at New York City Economic Development Corporation. They will be in conversation with moderator Jeff Mays, who's a journalist at the New York Times. Thank you, and please, a round of applause.
Great. Good to be here today with these experts. Hopefully we'll get into a little bit about job development and the role that nonprofits and such can play in this field. So I just want to start out with a sort of basic question. If you look at the sort of job statistics, you see that jobs are going up. The last quarter there were almost 14,000 jobs, almost 8,000 in healthcare. So it seems like the available jobs is not necessarily the issue, but at the same time we see kind of concentration and poverty going up in city neighborhoods. So I just wanted to, guys, if you could talk a little bit about what's happening in this field. Like, do you see how jobs are being created changing over the past couple of decades?
Good afternoon. So just want to build off of the data point. We're seeing the lowest unemployment rate. So it's a little above 4%. But when we talk about the communities that OBT is serving, that number is nearly double and triple in some cases. And so there's a couple of things that we're seeing on the ground, which I'm sure many of those of you in the audience are seeing as well in your work. And one, it's sort of the skills gap that we continuously talk about, that the jobs that are being created don't necessarily, the individuals who are living in different communities don't necessarily have the skills to access those jobs. I think the other piece that's really important, which we're going to get into a little bit later, is our ability to be planful for the jobs that are entering communities, that are coming into the city, to be able to close that skills gap.
Yeah, and I'll just pick up right on that. I think the sectors I've worked in and a lot of the stuff I've heard with the panelists today, it's been primarily manufacturing and construction, and a lot of that is more jobs that are available to folks at an entry level. So we've worked a lot in those two sectors, and I think one thing that has been expressed a couple times in the panel, but I don't want industries that, strong sectors like that have been a big part of the economy of New York City for a long time and continue to be forgotten also. And I think manufacturing is a great example of that. And we've got jobs that can be filled by individuals that maybe are underemployed that are looking to get into that sector. It's still a very healthy and robust sector. And construction, which is the work that I'm in now, my organization is primarily involved in connecting underemployed individuals into the construction industry. I mean, clearly there's a boom in construction, and there's a labor shortage, and there's a real need for folks to start to find those jobs. And I think, like in every industry, even traditional ones like a manufacturing construction, there are changes. Technology is certainly changing in the industry. Building is different. We're sourcing with different types of employers now, so solar companies have become one of our major referral sources. But the things that don't change for us and for employers that we work with is all the stuff that you always hear, the soft skills, what an employer needs, and the basics in our industry. Like, to get a solar job, you still need some basics in carpentry and electricity, and you have to make sure that you're still kind of have a base in some of those skill sets to be able to move the needle and get into the industry. And the last thing I would kind of focus on is we're having changing nature of work, even in these kind of more structured industries, is all the things that were mentioned. I think Kathy Wild mentioned on a panel about an hour back, is a real need for skills training, voc ed, for folks to really start to think about their career paths and articulate a way to get into these industries. And a real need for access to jobs, because again, employers can I think really drive a lot of this Skills training, they're a big part of once you get onto a job, get into a position, you can get a majority of your training at an entry level just by being on the job and being, ready to go, job ready.
So I'd love to expound upon the themes that my colleagues have already talked about through the microcosm of what we see happening at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And for 100 years, you had very accessible jobs that were in many ways the backbone of the middle class in Brooklyn. And that changed dramatically in the second half of the 1900s. And today we're trying to rebuild that modern manufacturing sector. But the reality is that manufacturing doesn't look like our grandparents' manufacturing anymore. And it doesn't even necessarily look like the manufacturing that was happening in Brooklyn even 10 years ago. So our CEO tells a story about his worst day at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and it was the day that the CEO of Cumberland Packing called him and told him that they had to leave New York. And this was a family-run company that had made every single packet of Sweet and Low that is ever made at the Brooklyn Navy Yard for decades. And ultimately, even though they wanted to, they just could not economically make that work anymore. And that meant, I think, somewhere around 300 jobs in a second. And I think what made that hardest for David to get that phone call is not just that this major, huge employer was leaving the yard, but the really harsh reality is that another sugar packet making company was not going to be moving into that space. The companies that we have moving into our spaces are manufacturing companies that are increasingly at the center of design and technology and the creative fields. And in some ways, that's really exciting because it's changing the definition of manufacturing, and we know that those are going to be high-quality jobs, but it also means that they're much more skilled jobs, and that when we walk around and talk to employers, what my team hears from them is that they need a combination of technical and professional skills that might not require a bachelor's degree, but they do require more than a high school diploma, and they require more than what people were doing stuffing sweet packets at Cumberland Packing. And so I think that that's the tension that we're dealing with, because now when I walk around the yard and go to manufacturing companies, they're making robots and 3D printers, and they're growing vegetables in labs on site, and really making sure that people are prepared for that type of job today is definitely what we're thinking about.
Did you want to chime in, Mark?
Yes. I'm Mark, I'm with EDC, and EDC primarily serves on behalf of the city as kind of the front door to businesses looking to expand, grow, invest in New York. And so where we have a good opportunity is to make sure that we're advocating for the city's talent, not only just those who actually have the needed skills for the jobs they want to create, but the skills that we actually want them to help invest in to develop. And so we have a really good sense of kind of what sectors, what investments, what types of business units are well positioned to expand into the city. I think we have also the capacity to be more intentional with the type of sectors we think would be well positioned for New Yorkers to be trained to develop those skills in. And then how can we then attract those companies to ensure that we're being more thoughtful to our approach?
So it's clear that the jobs are changing, but are you seeing an awareness in communities that the jobs are actually changing, that the skills they need will actually, are actually changing, and, there aren't traditional sort of when you say manufacturing jobs, you're not necessarily referring to the traditional idea of manufacturing jobs. And if not, like, how do you get that idea out to people that the skills that you're going to need are shifting?
So we're right in the middle of that. Our flagship location is in Sunset Park, Brooklyn, and so we do quite a bit of collaboration with Industry City. And this is a conversation that happens quite often amongst us. It may even happen at a community board meeting. But to the heart of your question, there's sort of a massive education effort that's really necessary at a citywide scale, sort of block by block, of helping people understand One, when we say manufacturing, what are we actually talking about in 2018? And what are the range of jobs? What is it that someone needs to know and be able to do to access a job? What are those wages? What are the steps I might need to take as someone who might be new to the workforce if I'm already working? You know, are there sort of training programs that are flexible enough to accommodate, you know, earning industry credentials that will now give me access to those jobs? So I feel like there's a ton of information, and we actually have, I think, existing resources and partnerships and collaborations, many of us in this room, that we can really leverage to do that. You know, I think about partnerships with like CWE around credentials for individuals who are new to the workforce or incumbent workers. Thinking about our collaboration at OBT with the Southwest Brooklyn Industrial Development Corporation, Brooklyn Workforce Innovations, to really both share information and also amongst ourselves figure out how do we maximize our individual resources as workforce organizations to build pipelines for those individuals who are walking through the door to create those opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, looking at it from the, I guess, the workforce development perspective and the audience that we're talking to today, I think, you know, it works in a couple different ways. I mean, some of my fellow panelists are, you know, mission-driven, bottom-line developers that work very closely with their tenants to open up positions. But looking out at the audience, and I know, you know, there's a lot of my colleagues here in the room too that run CBOs that work at workforce development organizations, and those can be two very different types of organizations. My group itself, we work on behalf of developers, so we have kind of a direct entry point into working with subcontractors. Developers will kind of weigh in to get us that fresh entry point. In addition to that, if we have any issues, we can rely upon our developer community to kind of step into that. But I think more importantly for us, and I think for a lot of the workforce organizations, whether you have the leverage of being a landlord or you're a CBO, is just this delivery system. So we have to make sure, and I know a lot of my colleagues in the room, we do this, but we're doing a really good practice, and this is coming from a person who's been a practitioner in workforce for a period of time now, how important it is that we deliver to the employers, particularly small businesses, and keep mentioning manufacturing and certainly construction, the industry I'm working in. You know, good news travels fast, but I think in our industry, bad news travels a lot faster, and you know, particularly these small businesses have very small networks, so I think one of the critical things I wanted to relate today with, you know, all the champions here that are in the room is our importance to deliver on behalf of the populations that we serve, the candidates we serve, and really trying to find the best match of individuals to employers, because we don't want to, you know, ultimately we don't want to waste anybody's time.
Yeah, I'd like to chime in. I think it's important for people who really facilitate workforce strategies or actually providing direct services to really build stronger relationships with not only just EDC, but chambers, folks who can really give you kind of a real-time pulse on where jobs of the future are and what they may look like and where the city is really trending. And the reason being is it's happening at a rapid pace. And so there's kind of no way, if you just kind of think from today, to really have a sense of what jobs will be available 5 years from now, unless you're kind of staying real time involved. And so to me, the more you're aligned, the more the people you serve can really get a full sense of what does the coding of tomorrow look like, or what does manufacturing of 10 years from now look like, so they actually can have the right support to make the decisions they want to make today.
What about the poorest New Yorkers? I know there's been a concern from a lot of workforce development people about whether, you know, the New Yorkers who are kind of really lacking in that skills area, whether they can make the leap, cross that gap, and even get a manufacturing job that involves robotics. What are we doing to help those people connect to these jobs that pay really well?
So at OBT, that is who we serve. We see ourselves as a bridge for individuals who are disconnected from education and employment onto career pathways. And I think what we've learned, I think especially over the past 2 years, as the sort of diversity in who we serve has expanded, is that forging those partnerships between our programming that sort of laid a foundation and more advanced trainings is absolutely critical. You know, someone might leave an OBT program and go into a part-time or a full-time job with the awareness, and I think this is really key, is building in into our training programs, yes, the skills, both the soft skills, maybe some technical skills, but this disposition of I need to continue to build my skill set even beyond this particular program. That's sort of I think, a non-negotiable in training these days.
Yeah.
I think this is probably the billion-dollar question, and I certainly don't know the answer to it, but two things that I would offer. One, when our team looks at every open job we have, whether it's an assembler job that doesn't necessarily require an advanced degree, somebody who's good with their hands, going to much more high-level jobs that maybe require a mechanical engineering degree. The question that I want our team to ask is, what does expanding economic opportunity look like for this job? And so I don't necessarily think it's realistic that someone who doesn't have a high school diploma tomorrow or next year is going to get that mechanical engineering job, but I do think it's realistic that we should be deeply partnered with CUNY to figure out how students who are the first in their family to go to college are getting that job instead of a kid who went to MIT, and thinking about how we're partnering with OBT or other partners to make sure that that assembler job goes to someone for whom that is that right first step. And then the second thing I would say is I feel like working with employers here is so important because one of the success stories I guess we talk about, we have a metal fabrication company where a guy who initially got hired to kind of help with the forklift driving ended up becoming a machinist because the CEO invested in him to learn. And I think that a lot of that career pathway growth that we're talking about has to happen on the job. And I don't know ultimately how we incentivize employers more to do that, but I think that that has to be part of the answer too.
Are those sort of lattices in place in like the construction industry, for example?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts on that. One is, it's been mentioned, I think on the panel here, but a couple of times around the importance of CUNY and I think community colleges. And for construction, majority of our placements, it's entry-level positions, general laborers, but we know what's going to rule the day is somebody gets a job, gets their foot in the door, as mentioned, starts to get a little bit of experience, really can start to build up that credential. Part of our model is it's cyclical work, so we work really hard to make sure they're placed in the next position once a position ends. But I think a kind of next evolution for what we kind of call unaffiliated workers that aren't directly connected to an employer or maybe aren't directly connected to a trade, and there are thousands in New York City, how we start to really think with whether it's the community colleges or a community-based organization around a more robust skills training. And one program that I think a couple of community colleges use is the NCCR curriculum, which is fantastic. I think looking into how that starts to get expanded. I know, there's a carpentry and electrical and a plumbing track, and some of the colleges are starting to test out the first couple of modules of that, how we start to think more holistically how folks are getting training, they're going back to work, and while they're working, they're getting the training, then they can kind of keep building that skill while they're also building up their experiential lessons.
Mark, the city is making some investments in that area, right? In connecting, being able to connect people to those jobs.
Yes, and I can only really speak to what EDC's approach is, but our strategy is really grounded in sector development, where I think people will see a more inclusive approach moving forward is as we shape our initiatives, and I'll highlight cybersecurity. Yes, we want to attract those major companies who will be successful and create a lot of job opportunities here in the city. As a part of that investment, we're also investing in the ecosystem to train talent and skills so that people who don't have traditional routes to work in cyber, and cyber is one of those fields where you weren't trained on it no matter at what level you were 25 years ago. And so it gives us a lot of flexibility to really shape what entry level can be no matter where you are, and then work with employers to really ensure they're committing to hiring that talent.
I know there's a lot of excitement about the Brooklyn Navy Yard and what you guys are doing out there. Can you just talk a little bit more about that sort of development process from companies coming in to you guys connecting them to the specific needs that they have, and how that's changed over the past couple of years?
Yeah, certainly. So for 20 years or so, the Brooklyn Navy Yard has run an employment center and connected at this point over 3,000 people to jobs within our work. Today, first of all, we're at a very exciting point at the Brooklyn Navy Yard because we're in the biggest period of growth in the last 100 years. So currently we're going from about 8,500 jobs on the yard currently, up from about 7,000 a year ago, to about 20,000 within the next 3 years. And seeing that happen in real time has been a very crazy, again, microcosm of how jobs are changing and what's going on. But that's also led us to think about our workforce development efforts in new ways. So today we have 2 key areas of workforce development. One is our hiring services, which is in many ways the same work we've been doing for the last 20 years to deeply work with all of the businesses that are employers on the yard to understand their needs. And then outside of the gates to operate an employment center where anyone from the local community can come in and let us know that they're looking for work. And so I think that embedded workforce development where our team, Regina, who's in the back, ably leads, and make sure that we're in constant communication with those employers and really understanding what do they need tomorrow, because often if you're a small business, you woke up and realized you needed an administrative assistant probably a week ago, or what are you planning that 6 months down the road? You need 5 CNC machinists. Can we work to think through how we can coordinate on training to make sure we're opening that opportunity as much as possible? So that's our hiring services work. The other half of our work, I think, is really more targeted around responding to the changes in jobs, and that's thinking about career pathways. It's operating a lot of internships, especially with CUNY, to try to make sure that young people are getting the feedback they need when they're still in school to build those skills. But the newest thing that we are doing that maybe I'll talk more about in a second, but is the Brooklyn STEAM Center, where we're working with the Department of Education to start an innovative training hub to train high school students in 11th and 12th grade in 5 industry pathways that we know are rapidly changing and are going to have jobs available. And so 300 high school juniors and seniors a year will be on site at the Brooklyn Navy Yard. And I think that that innovation around really embedding workforce development, the way actually a lot of I think our programs are, and making sure that that feedback loop takes much less than 5 years like Mark was talking about, but is really changing on a month-to-month basis, is some of what we're trying to do.
All right, we have a few minutes left, so I'd love for each of you guys to talk about your bold vision. What would you like to see if you had, unlimited pot of money, unlimited resources,
Limited money,
access? Maybe each of you can just go down and talk about sort of the big, bold vision you'd like to see out there.
Yeah, I over the last few years, I've kind of concluded that when people think about talent, they're not just thinking about it at the university level or among workforce providers or professionals who are currently working. But the way we've structured our national, state, and local governments, they really all work in a silo. And so you kind of imagine having like a chief talent person for the United States that's really like thinking about this like strategically, or on a state or even on a city level, who can really ensure like that the systems are all preparing us through all these traditional and non-traditional ways for the opportunities of the future.
Who's next?
So I actually have to give a quick shout out for credit to Carolyn Ioso, our new Director of Community and Government Relations, because we've been talking about this quite a bit. There's been a lot of talk about the city charter revision process and all sorts of ideas and ways that that process can be leveraged to shift policy, to shift processes. I think that the process by which economic development happens in communities, there's no discernible like transparency around how that happens, when it happens, how information flows. I think your team is doing a pretty good job in Sunset Park. But I think using the revision process as a way to be able to embed and codify, okay, when there's an economic, beyond a certain scale, when there's economic development happening, these are the steps that should be taken. Everything from obviously engaging the community board, but even more broadly, how do you engage local nonprofits to really be able to get the information out? Because it's often communities responding to plans, often with picket signs. And I think being able to get ahead of that in a thoughtful and deliberate way, where we know, a year, 6 months, 9 months, whatever the timeline is, being able to plan for that from a workforce perspective, but also making sure that community residents are aware and can make thoughtful and planful decisions about their own lives and the kind of opportunities that they want to access.
Yeah, someone who hangs around or used to hang around a lot of community boards, that's a common complaint, that things come to them fully formed where they wanted to be more involved in implementing the vision in the first place. David?
Yeah, I mean, mine's, it's kind of the theme I keep harping on. It's really engaging the employers we're working with more, and it's a love letter to all the great community-based organizations and workforce development organizations that are here today, that are part of the New York City Employment Training Coalition. One thing in my role, and I've been on for about a year and a half, is I get to work citywide now, so I get to work with all the different construction partners, and there are a lot of them. And what I'm finding I don't think employers, because they never have enough time, because they have 1,000 things going on at once, they don't understand how robust the network is here. Sure, it is underfunded and we're stretched too thin, we're understaffed, but there are so many times when myself and the building skills team can call on one of our employer partners and immediately get a scaffold training set up that day, get silica awareness training so we can get a person that we identified for a masonry position onto that site right away. I think there's so many different training programs. Liliana's team at OBT, they're running a masonry training program. It's such a burgeoning sector right now. There's so much resource. It's such a robust network here. I think part of all the conversations today is how we elevate the voice, particularly of the community-based organizations here. And I know, with the new leadership and Joey at, New York City Employment Training Coalition, that's going to be a big goal, is getting these employers to understand that there are resources with these organizations who can pivot in real time and can be very flexible to employer demands.
I think my idea David might be doing already, but I think it should spread, so we'll find out. So Jobs for the Future released a report recently that I thought was really interesting, and they looked at all the middle-skilled jobs, which they define as jobs where people were making at least $15 an hour, and you didn't necessarily need a higher degree. And they broke it down between what they called lifetime jobs, springboard jobs, and static jobs, which essentially are what they sound like. But lifetime jobs, you were starting out at a high wage, you were going to do the same type of job for a long time, but it was going to provide family-sustaining wages. I think their example was dental hygienist. A springboard job was something where you were starting low, but there was a clear career ladder you could grow, which there often is, it sounds like, in business and IT. And static jobs were where those career ladders weren't clear, and it was more likely people would get stuck. And so I think a bold question is, how do we take places where there are those types of static jobs and figure out how, in a more cohort model or something like that, to not just get someone in that job, but then to stay with them, to help them acquire skills and then move into the next job that would be the next step. And that's some of what I hear you talking about with construction, but I think thinking about other sectors where that could apply.
Quick lightning round. Why? Give me your top reason why you're optimistic about the city's economic development prospects, kind of reaching out into the community. Are you seeing anything in particular that makes you particularly optimistic? Just quickly.
I like the voices that I see. I come out of a activism media background, and so to me, challenge the system. Like, it is fine. Like, they will be okay, we will be okay. If you have bold ideas, if we can do a better job, make that clear. And I see a lot more of that, and that's the activist in me appreciates that.
My optimism is squarely in the people we serve. They're hungry to learn. They're hungry to sort of propel themselves forward. They push us to be better. So our responsiveness is both to the external environment, but every single day we have young people saying we want more.
You took mine. Exactly the same thing as luckily I get to be in this role more at the practitioner level and get to be very involved in changing people's lives by placing them in positions and really starting to think about them scaling up with their skill set and wages. And there's some challenges. I'm looking at the building skills team right now, but there's just so many successes that we find every day that we're having real impact on people's lives, and that gets me up every morning.
Yes, to echo the two of you, I'm optimistic because of a young guy named Sam, who's part of the Brooklyn STEAM Center program. He's a senior this year. He's in the first graduating class we'll ever have from the STEAM Center. And he spent this summer as an intern in the IT department at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, which is a place that I don't really understand and go very often, but Sam is very, very passionate about it now. And after he interned this summer, there were 4 other interns, all of whom were college interns. And Sam is part of a cohort of kids that's been studying design and engineering at the STEAM Center, and our head of IT picked Sam, of everyone, to be his intern for the full year, to be a paid employee making $15 an hour this year. And I think if we have that kind of investment in not just skills, but social capital and networks and experiences, that ultimately will set up the kind of career pathways that we need for the types of jobs that are coming.
Excellent. Let's give our panelists a round of applause. Thank you.